Hello and welcome to Between the Lines. I'm Esther Hatch and I am here today with Sarah and Enan, Sean and Bessie, Tracy Hunter Abramson, and today we have an extra special treat. We are here with author and editor and just overall amazing person, Jolene Perry. So Jolene has experience in writing, editing, teaching. She's an amazing person to just boost an author's self-confidence. You can find great tutorials from her on her social media. She's just all around just an interesting and amazing person. So we're really happy to have her today. Today specifically, we're going to be talking about co-authoring, which is a pretty fun subject. But we're going to start first by having Jolene just give us a quick introduction of yourself, how you joined the writing community, and a little bit more information for those of our listeners that need an introduction.
Yeah, I'll try to keep it as brief as possible, but I signed my first book contract in 2009, and that book was a regionally published book. My second book release was actually a co-authored project, and my co-author and I were chatting about the book on Twitter, and an editor reached out and said, "I want to see this when you're done." And so we sent it to her, and then that was my first nationwide release. So how's that for wild? And since then, I have traditionally published and independently published. I've worked with large presses, medium presses, small presses, and just myself. About 6 years ago, I started editing almost full time, or about 2/3 of the time that I spend in front of my computer are editing. I learned how to edit from another person that I co-authored with because I really wanted to work with her editor. And she is an acquisitions editor at Sourcebooks. So she is the person who taught me how to edit for other people.
That's awesome. I didn't realize that co-authoring was part of even the beginning of your journey. That's awesome.
Really was.
It's really neat. I think I'm actually the only one here who has not co-authored anything. I've done anthologies, which is a different thing where we each write our own little story within one book. But I've never actually co-authored, which is, writing a book together. So to me, that sounds just completely overwhelming. I think partially because I have such a weird writing process, but I would like to know how you guys all made that decision to jump into doing something so huge with another person.
Well, my first co-authoring was The Heirs of Falcon Point, which was maybe even more complicated than most because we had 4 authors instead of 2. And I'm sure many of our listeners are familiar with Heirs of Falcon Point. It starts with a historical part that Amanda Sowards or A.L. Sowards did. And then Tracy and Paige Edwards and I co-authored the latter 3/4. And it came about because I made a trip to Washington, D.C. and met up with Tracy and Paige there. And they had been brainstorming this great idea and asked if I would like to be involved. And I would say within about an hour, we had Amanda on board, we had our editor on board, and we basically had the green light. And so that was how it started. And I think we'll talk more about this a little bit during this podcast, but it's easier to work with some people than others. And Tracy and I just found that we worked well together. And so when Heirs of Falcon Point finished, we decided to start a spin-off series with the 2 of us. So that's kind of how we started.
That's great. I feel like that's very similar to how the cookbook ended up happening, except Sean was the one who had the idea and roped some of us into joining in.
I know. I'm never going to live it down.
Every chance I get, I will bring it up.
That's true.
A lot of people don't actually know that I am doing co-authoring projects because I'm brand new to the world of co-authoring, and what I've been working on isn't out in the world. It hasn't been announced. In fact, it's a project I'm doing with Jolene. And it got started because she and I were brainstorming. I was trying to think of some ideas to pitch to a publisher. I was going through a few that I had. And in a moment of weakness, told her about a story idea I had had for years and years and years and years. And not constantly, but frequently ran through my mind. But I knew I couldn't write it because there was a whole portion of it that takes place in modern day. And I don't write contemporary. So I'm telling her about this story idea, and she was like, Sarah, I write contemporary. And I was like, okay, I didn't want to ask you. And I've never done this before. So it's a terrible idea. But the more we talked about it, the more we loved it and decided to give it a shot. And so we've been working on things together, and it has worked even better than I thought it would. So that's how it started on our end.
That's awesome.
So I feel like I kind of snuck my way into writing with Sarah, but I'm not at all sorry. Because we have a lot of fun. And what's interesting for us, and I'm sure we'll get into this a little bit later, is that our writing processes are very different. And so it's a lot of going, okay, I have to just write a bunch of words that aren't going to make it into the book. So you just ignore what I'm putting in our joint document right now, because this is what I have to do to figure out my character and everything else. My first collaboration I did purely for fun. My second one, a friend of mine read a line and she said she didn't know the story that went with it. And I said, I know the story that goes with it. And so we wrote that. My friend Krista, I did a collaboration with her in large part because I wanted to work with her editor, who at the time was Lisa Abrams at Simon Pulse. And that was a big opportunity for me. And then like Sarah said right now, Sarah said she had this idea and one part was contemporary. And I was like, I want in on this. So I'm really excited about the project, possibly projects that we will be working on together.
That it's so fun to hear. And I feel like, well, I have conversations like this with people that are like, hey, should we do this? And then I just panic. I'm like so impressed that you guys actually go through with these crazy ideas. It's so cool. It's so cool. So how, when you get together, how do you even decide who writes what? Are you writing all of it together? Are you writing portions? And I mean, I could tell that some of them, I know Heirs of Falcon Point, it was portions. But how do you deal with deciding whose job it is to write what parts of a story?
Well, the project Jolene and I have been tackling together and the ideas we have for future projects, it's been pretty easy to divide it because I write what I like to call the ye old timey parts. So it's the stuff back a ways because I don't really do contemporary, but we found that my definition of contemporary is very strange. There's another idea we've tossed between ourselves. The contemporary modern day part of it still takes place over 100 years ago, but it was too new for me. So that's how we divide it up. I write the older stuff and she writes the newer stuff. So that's been pretty easy for us.
Just for the listeners right now, Sarah was telling me about this very early 1900s. And I'm thinking in my head, oh, this is the ye old timey part of the book. And then Sarah says, and then the other timeline would be like mid-Regency. And I'm like, oh, okay. I forgot who I was talking to. This is
like 19-teens is
there's a 19
modern.
in the front of the year.
It's
modern.
Contemporary.
Yeah.
Exactly. Guys, I have a problem.
Yeah, so that was fine.
And we know that Sarah has issues with anything that starts with a 19. It's
Yeah,
just,
exactly.
we may convert her at some point, but
No.
I just don't see it happening
I
anytime
don't think it's going to happen.
So, yeah, for me and Sean, our sections are determined by which character's point of view we're in. And so when Sean and I are doing our version of plotting, which Sarah has witnessed, and it's not, she would not call it plotting, but for us it's plotting. We basically figure out like, all right, what's going to happen next? And then whose point of view would it be best from? And then sometimes it could kind of go from a couple of different points of view. It'll be like, okay, well, which part, like, is this something that maybe has a fight scene? That might be something I write more, or something that is, so much better at it than I am. So sometimes we'll do that. And sometimes we're like, we'll just help each other, like, all right, you'd really need to do it from your point of view, but I'm happy to kind of get some bullet points on XYZ or whatever, or she'll give me some insights, for that. So that's why sometimes it sounds more blended than it should, because even though I wrote something, I had some influence that I really needed from Sean, or even though she wrote something, she might have something that was influenced by something I had. So
that's so fascinating. So when you're doing this, what are some advantages and what do you just love about writing a book with another person?
So I love the brainstorming part because I honestly did not realize, like Sean was saying, Sean and I are both what they call pantsers, discovery writers. And she's like, I normally have a beginning point, a midpoint, and an end. And I'm like, yeah, I think that's what I do. And halfway
You
through our
lied.
first one, Sean informed me that I have no idea what I'm doing. I believe bonkers was the word she may have used at that point. So, but it's fun to brainstorm with somebody who really like understands the characters as well as you do, and like can really help you figure out what happens next.
Yeah, I agree. That has really, really been fun. And for me, having someone else write half the book is also a huge, huge 2 thumbs up on that because it goes so fast. Because Tracy and I live in different time zones. When we are writing, we do it in a joint Google document. And I will get up in the morning and there's a whole new scene there. And she'll get up in the morning and there's a whole new scene there. And suddenly our word count is just skyrocketing and we didn't have to put all those words in.
It feels like cheating is what it feels like.
Yeah, that's something really interesting that I have discovered as we've been working on this. My writing schedule is really very packed, but co-writing something has allowed me to slip in another project without it being totally and completely overwhelming. So yeah, that's been nice. Another thing that's been great is I have had spinning in my mind a lot of ideas that involve contemporary plot lines, but I never could have written them because it's really not what I do. So now all of a sudden, totally different types of books have opened up and different possibilities. And we're tiptoeing outside of my usual like genre and subgenre, but I can do that because I'm writing with someone who has written in those areas. And so that's been a great thing. I feel like do things as an author because you've got someone else there whose strengths can kind of fill in the gaps where you're still building strengths.
I just want to echo what Sarah said in that I think you tend to write better when you know, like, oh, someone else is going to see this, like they're going to see my messy draft, and you do. I think you take a little more time and you put a little more effort into it. And anybody who follows me on social media for writing advice know that I talk about self-editing a lot. And what's interesting about co-authoring is it's like one step away from self-editing, right? Where you have this one person, like Tracy said, who knows the characters really well, that you can bounce ideas off of. And so you're getting that level of edits as you're writing the book. And I think in the end, you turn out a cleaner product. And, it's really neat going, hey, I think I need a pause point here. And so we can kind of regroup and make sure that we're still angling this the right direction. And, it's not like Sarah will say, I agree. Let's look at what we have so far. Let's look at where we want to go. And let's figure out what threads are missing or what things we can flesh out now. So our first drafts are going to be a lot cleaner than they would be if you were writing alone. Unless maybe you're Sarah.
I mean, my first drafts are like they're basically very long outlines. I would call them almost like they're mess. Jolene's seen some of them.
I do very similar. So yeah, I do very, when I see yours in those very early stages, I was like, oh, this looks like my books look. Yeah.
A big mess thrown onto Google Doc and you're like, I promise this is going to work out. I promise.
It will get fixed.
I think now I'm like realizing why I don't do this. Cause when she said like, yeah, you have to send people your work in your early stages, I'm like,
So terrifying.
That is terrifying. Yes. So what is something you guys think is crucial to co-authoring successfully? And not just for like writing the book, for like not being like me, so scared to show someone something, or like not getting upset with the other person because they're slower or faster. Like, how do you do something like this combined and end up still really liking each other at the end of it?
One thing I have found that's been really interesting, like I'd wondered when Jolene and I first started working on the projects we've worked on, because we do have pretty different styles of writing, whether or not that could work. But what I found is there's actually a real benefit to having different writing processes that are complementary. Because yeah, I do plot out a lot and I do a lot of outlining, but that has helped it gives her a bare bones, which is where she usually starts anyway. And so I will write my part while she is discovery writing hers. And as hers gets adjusted, I can go back and adjust mine, and it still works, because to me, it's like doing my second pass edit. So we found that we don't write the same, but we write complementary. And that's helped us to lean into each other's strengths and fill in gaps. And that's been really great for us.
Sarah and I also both very much center our stories around characters that we build. And so while our process is different, the way we approach story and what we think makes a good story is the same. And so that's really important for us. And it's like, once we have that sense of character and that sense of how are these now and then parts working together, how are these characters the same, how are they different, what's setting them apart, what does one learn from the other, and vice versa, it gives you that we are coming from the same place, or we're coming from that same central idea of character first, everything else second. So that's really helpful. I think the other thing is being really upfront with your partner when you're starting a collaboration project, of going, friendship comes first no matter what. If anybody's not happy, we stop. And we may stop forever. We may stop and divide up the parts. You take that character, I take this character, or we may just put it on the back shelf for a little while we sort out how we want the story to go. So I think like setting those parameters before you sit down and start writing is really important, where you're like, no, friendship first, everything else second. We want this to be fun. We need this to be fun. We recognize there's always parts of the process that aren't as fun as other parts, but hopefully we can kind of bolster each other through those to get to the end.
Yeah, compatibility is really huge, but I also think it's that lack of ego, because, like, I know when Sean and I are working on something, knowing that we don't have any trouble being honest with each other if we think something's not quite working. It's a discussion. It's not really a criticism. It's more of a, it's that gentle hand. It's like, hey, what do you think about, I'm not sure if this is working, or, kind of approaching it that way, because we're really having a conversation and trying to decide together maybe what could be better, or what direction we should take. So I think that really makes it where there's never any hurtful feelings, because we both just want to make the product the best it can be. But honestly, when we finish a project together, I'm like, oh man, I have to go back to writing by myself again. Like, I miss her, it's so much fun. So.
Thanks, Tracy. I miss you too.
What she says while we're ending one right now.
Yes. I agree. I agree with everything everyone has said, the compatibility and the lack of ego. And also, Sarah mentioned this already. I think recognizing the other author's strengths, and then instead of feeling intimidated by that, like, oh, they're so much better than me at fill in the blank, leaning into those strengths and using them to create a book that would be better without your partner. I mean, is that right? Would be better unless... Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. It's better as a partnership than it would be by yourself. I know words. They're just leaving me right now. And so an example of that, and again, I think Tracy mentioned this earlier, is in our combined books, if there are fight scenes, I will very often say, okay, Tracy, my character has to do this because it's in my character's point of view. But I don't know how to disarm a man carrying a gun. So would you please talk me through this? And then there are other times when she will message me, will say, okay, how would a European say this? And is this the word that we would use for this? So we recognize each other's strengths and we use it to strengthen the manuscript.
Sarah lets me write the kisses.
Oh,
well, that's a match made in heaven.
Gladly.
Oh my gosh, that's awesome.
Guys, that might be my favorite part of co-authoring. I'll never have to write a kissing scene again.
He was like, okay, Joe, I think they should kiss here, but please keep it tame.
I have to read this.
But Jolene, do you listen to that suggestion? Or are you like,
I did. I thought I did.
Okay.
It was there was more to it than what I would have written, but it didn't go so far that I was like, Jolene, these are insights I didn't need to have.
That's so fun. Well, I feel like I should have not been part of this because now I'm like, oh my gosh, why am I not doing this? Especially hearing about all the strengths parts, because I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm really bad at like XYZ things. So not really bad. I shouldn't say it that way, but weaknesses happen. So really quickly for Jolene, we've loved having you here. This has been so interesting. And I would like everyone to know, because I follow Jolene on social media and she is, especially anyone writing, she's a great person to follow. Can you let everyone know where we can find you online in all your capacities?
The best places to find me online are on TikTok, and my username is @JRV_Perry, and it's the same for Instagram. And my website is just joewritesbooks.com.
Nice. Awesome. So thanks so much for joining us. We are so happy to have you guys listening at home, and make sure if you've enjoyed our podcast to click and subscribe and join us next time on Between the Lines.